and not forget that. Good morning, everyone. Got a couple that are still connecting to the audio, so I'll give them a minute to finish connecting. But thank you so much for joining us today on this lovely Wednesday for this very long week, but it's going great. My name is Becca Phillips, and I'm with WVU TAB. And just a couple of reminders before we get started. We are recording the session, and materials will be sent out to everyone who registered. So you will have access to the slides as well as the recording. And then we do have captions enabled. So if you would like to use those, just click the CC button to enable captions. Those are automatically generated, so they may be slightly inaccurate, just so you know. We are also monitoring the chat, so please feel free to ask any questions throughout the webinar so that we can answer those, maybe even in the chat, or we'll interrupt the presenter to ask your questions live. Hooray. And with that, little icebreaker question for everyone today. Where physically are you joining from, or what community are you representing? If you could put that in the chat to kind of introduce yourself, let us know where you're from. We'll hand things over to Katie now to introduce our topic.
Good morning. Thanks, Becca. All right, thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Katie C. I'm here at WVU TAB, so we're the Technical Assistance to Brownfield Provider for EPA Region 3, and that includes Virginia. So that explains our connection here today. Carrie, our director, is unable to join us today in terms of actually presenting, but I know she sends her well wishes for us. She's been a bit under the weather, so we certainly want to wish her a speedy recovery. So I'm the TAB lead here for EPA Region 3, and I'm also joined by Seth. Seth Cardwell just started, he was just saying about 3 months ago, so he is our Community Development Associate, and you will be hearing from him later today. And so we are also joined by Christian Smith with the EPA, as well as Karen. I don't know if either of you would like to introduce yourselves, feel free to say hey.
Sure. Hello. Good morning, everyone. My name is Christian Smith. I'm with the EPA Region 3 here in Philadelphia. I've been working with the EPA branch for about 2 years. I spent one of those years working for the Army Corps, and through an interagency agreement, I came over to the EPA. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you all today and to speak a little bit about our grant process.
And I'm Karen Weber. I'm the State Brownfields Coordinator for Virginia. Been with the Virginia DEQ for about 1.5 years. The Brownfields Coordinator for just about 1 year. And so, familiar names that you may also recognize: Meade Anderson, he's still here. And Lucas Hamelman also participates in our Brownfields program. He's still here. So we've got a pretty good team to help support our Virginia communities.
Thank you both. Seth, did you want to say any words?
Good morning. I am Seth Cardwell. I'm the Community Development Associate. Like Katie said, I've been here for about 3 months. So I just graduated in May with my Master's of Public Administration, and I'll be presenting on how WVU TAB can help towards the end of the webinar.
Thanks, everyone. All right, so again, we are WVU TAB, and so a bit of what we do includes brownfield education. So that's what brings us here today. We're providing this webinar in coordination with the EPA and your state environmental agency so that we can hopefully help prepare you for a solid application for this round of EPA grant funding. So just a quick highlight of what we're going to discuss, the types of EPA brownfield grants that are currently available, some details for the application, how TAB can help, important dates to remember, and then we'll certainly have opportunities to ask questions. Please feel free to ask questions along the way. There are a couple of scheduled breaks in the slide deck you can see where you have the chance to ask questions of us, or if you want to save them until the end, that's okay as well. You can ask them, you can interrupt us and ask, or you can type it into the chat. All right, Christian.
All right, so to give everyone a brief overview of our grant process, this year our annual competition is called the MARC competition. You may every other year you may hear it called the ARC competition, ARC, and what that stands for is multi-purpose assessment, revolving loan fund, and cleanups. These are our 4 main grants that we offer every year, every other year. It all depends upon the funding available. So for example, this year, we're not giving out any new revolving loan fund grants. They're only doing supplemental applications this time around. We can go to the next slide, please. So this is your typical timeline for the order of events. Your applications are typically due in November. This year, it's November 13th, and that initial submission will be through grants.gov. This is a hard deadline, so I urge you all to be very vigilant about this. Don't wait till the last minute. A lot of errors happen the last minute. If the system goes down for one reason or another, we'll work with you guys. But yeah, just be very attentive of that November 13th date. After that, it'll go through an eligibility review from us. You'll go through a threshold review. That's the December-January timeframe. After that, we'll have a national review. This will be made up of a panel of 3 members, one from the region, one from outside the region, and then typically someone from outside the Brownfield program. And that's to help kind of eliminate bias and get the best possible scoring. We'll average all 3 of those, and then they rank that. And depending upon the number of applications we receive, the amounts of funding that are requested, that'll determine how many grants that we're able to award. And then come around the April timeframe is when we'll make the national selection. And then, May is when we'll make that selection. April is when we'll do the reviews, finalize all that. And then from May till October 1st, you'll work with your project officer on your application documents to get it ready. And your grant will actually be officially awarded on October 1st of the following year. So it is quite a long process, but we're here to work with you every step of the way. So we can go to the next slide, please. So this chart shows what we anticipate offering. I guess at this point it's more or less finalized. Again, it does fluctuate because not everyone asks for the maximum amount. Some people come in for very specific amounts. I've seen grants that they'll ask for, I need 378,000, and some odd change. They're very specific, so that just depends upon how many we can offer. So this chart talks about how much we anticipate we offer. So for example, multi-purpose, we estimate we can award about 20 of them this year with a maximum of 1 million per. So again, that all depends. We have our assessment for state and tribal coalitions. We do separate out a little bit if you're a new assessment grantee or an existing one. We anticipate awarding about 30 of each. You can see the maximum project years. This was recently upgraded or increased. It used to be about 3 years for most of these. But what we've been seeing is with this amount of funding, it's taking a little bit extra time to finalize the project and expend all funds. So we do have a slightly increased project period. So I won't go over all of these. You can see this in the chart. I'm sure this will be available to you all afterwards. And I believe this is posted on our website as well. So feel free to check it out at any one of those sources. And we can go to the next slide. So your eligibility, who can apply for our grants? This is a big question we get every year. State, local governments, state, local, and tribal governments, general purpose units of local governments, regional councils or redevelopment agencies, nonprofit agencies. There is a caveat. The 501c4 organizations are only eligible for cleanup grants. And then your quasi-governmental agencies are also available to apply for any one of these multi-purpose assessment, cleanup, or revolving loan funds typically, but again, not this year for the revolving loan fund. Next slide, please.
All right, this is me. Thanks, Christian.
Mhm.
Okay, so Christian touched briefly on the threshold and eligibility review, which happens soon after you've actually submitted an application. So we just want to give you a brief overview of why it's so important, why the threshold review is so important. And so this is submitted with your actual grant application, but there's a list of criteria. And so that is what is reviewed by the EPA, and it's a pass-fail. It's reviewed on a pass-fail basis. And so it seems like a lot of criteria for some of the particular grants, and but the questions are really just trying to determine your eligibility. So it like I say, it may seem overwhelming, but it's really just trying to establish, are you in fact eligible? Has the work that you've done to prepare for this actual application got you to where you need to be in order to actually apply? So it's very important, and if it's determined that you're not eligible through the threshold criteria section, then you will not move forward to the actual grant application. Christian, if you think of anything to jump in on throughout this process, feel free to do so. So here we've just highlighted the criteria for each particular grant. I don't want to, dive into this as, the content is highlighted here, but just pulling it out briefly again from the individual grant applications. So with the multipurpose grant application, you need to really highlight your community involvement, identify your target area. It's certainly important that you determine the brownfield site ownership. You need to determine that you actually do own one of the sites that you're actually going to be going through the cleanup process with. And then also it's important that at least 70% of the funds that you've received from the EPA have been drawn down by October 1st of this year. So again, the application deadline is November 13th, but you need to make sure at least 70% of the funds have been drawn down. When it comes to assessment grants, there are 3 different types of assessment grants, but it's very similar for the community-wide as well as the state and tribal applications. And so that also involves community involvement. Again, also the 70% drawdown requirement by October 1st. And then when it comes to those who are applying as a state or tribal entity, you do need to identify the target area and priority sites. And you can also, if you're going to take the opportunity, to name contractors and subrecipients at this time. When it comes to coalition assessment grants, there's a little bit more information here. You do need to list the number of non-lead coalition members as well as their eligibility. So you need to make sure that you've listed that they are in fact eligible. And again, the threshold criteria portion of the application, it does provide you with details. This is just pulling out some highlights. Identify existing brownfield grants to the non-lead members. Coalition agreement, you do need to have that in place between the lead and non-lead members. Also, again, here, just want to point out that 70% of funds from the grant must be drawn down if you do have an existing grant. Cleanup grant, this one does look intimidating, but again, just want you to know that this is for the more of an affirmation of the information and data. So again, the sheer number of the criteria looks daunting for a cleanup grant, and this is the one with the most criteria. But again, this information should be readily available, but again, it's just looking for an affirmation of it all. So this is where, again, you do need to confirm that you do own the site prior to the actual application, and that you certainly need to make sure that you did the due diligence, the all appropriate inquiry before you took ownership of the property. You need to talk about the status and the history of the contamination of the site. Actually determine and confirm that the site meets the brownfield definition. Let's see. Any other, community notification. That's important because before you actually submit the application, you need to make sure that you have actually took the time to run a notice of the application in the newspaper and that you've held a public meeting. There are a couple of ways that you can do that, and so we're happy to help you with that if you have any questions. And again, we're happy to answer any questions you may have with that. Christian, can you think of any other things that maybe we should highlight?
The only thing I'm thinking about is we also get our lawyers involved in this. At this point, they also do a review of this, and if you can think of a lawyer, they're very strict. They don't have a problem. So I would just, yeah, make sure you include everything, make sure it's all there and very clear, legible, all of that, because if you're missing even a little thing, I've seen where mismatched addresses they'll say this is ineligible for, based upon the law, and then you got to argue against that, so just be clear, as concise as possible, I guess I would say here.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much.
Hey, Katie.
Yes.
We got a question in the chat from Christopher, and they say, question, can we get a couple samples of the various application types so we can see what a successful application looks like? I'm guessing insufficient info is a clear no, but maybe too much information can be frustrating for reviewers.
Yes, we'll get your contact information, Christopher, and we can absolutely provide that. And they are not messing around when they talk about there being a page limit for the application. Christian's nodding. They will not read anything over 10 pages. So just as you said, the information needs to be succinct. We'll go a little bit into more detail later in this webinar, but you really want to get to the point, and you want to be thoughtful and thorough when you tell the story of your site and your project, how your particular site or sites tie into any existing plans. We as TAB are here and available to help you review particular sections. We'd like to see the whole thing to, be a second set of eyes to make sure, you do in fact have everything in place. But we're happy to start to do that with little sections of review. But that is something that we'd be happy to help you with, because again, it is very important that you're very clear with that story, and it needs to be, a very compelling story. And as Christian said, just this particular piece does need to be very matter of fact, and also answer the questions. This is a particular grant application where if they ask the question, you need to provide a response. And if it doesn't apply, explicitly say that as well. Christian, any other thoughts?
Yeah, so this is definitely a delicate balance. You want to provide enough information without providing too much. You want to be, think of it, if you're reading this thing, we're not holding that against you, but at the same time, there's this, unconscious level of bias. I've seen people submit applications with no borders, 8-point font, and we're squinting to read it. So, we haven't gone that nitty gritty, I don't think, in the formatting of it. But if you're the reviewer reviewing that, you're squinting the entire 10 pages or whatever it is, and if you're going down that small, it's a lot more information. So you kind of just want to make it so that it's not annoying the reviewer, I guess you could say. And then at the same time, you should also write this as if the person reviewing this has no idea what a brownfield is. Well, I shouldn't say that. They're not familiar with your site, your geography, your region. So there's one person, like I said, the home reviewer will review it. We kind of get that. But then you have someone usually outside brownfields and then someone outside the region. So they're not necessarily familiar with the same problems, same issues you guys face. They're familiar with brownfields and all of that, but the more that you can explain without overkill is, helpful. Just, explain like housing situations an issue here, or whatever it is. So again, it's a delicate balance.
Thanks again. Good question, Christopher. This you're going to hear a little bit more about later from Karen, but when it comes to the cleanup grants and threshold criteria, for site characteristic, the applicant needs to know that there has in fact been a sufficient level of the site characterization from your environmental site assessment that has been done in order for remediation to begin. And so this letter will be provided by your state environmental agency. And in this case, that would certainly be the Virginia DEQ. Karen, you want to talk a bit more about that a little bit later?
We'll touch on that a little bit later. So, or now.
I forgot.
There we are. The cleanup grant does require a little bit more from Virginia DEQ. And even though these are EPA grants, this is an opportunity to connect with us and dialogue with us, and we can help answer questions as well. There would be an eligibility review for VRP that confirms eligibility. And you'll need to state whether the site, or we will state whether a site is already enrolled in VRP, and you'd have to note in your application whether you intend to enroll it in VRP if it's not already. There is a situation where sites, in the guidance, it does say sites that are not eligible for VRP. The example that they provide is hazardous material removal, such as asbestos. So a site that is asbestos removal may not ultimately be enrolled in the VRP, but is still available for this kind of cleanup grant. And those are the kinds of conversations we'll have, and that's the kind of detail that will go into this letter. Next slide.
Sorry. So one of the big questions we get every year is, what can you apply for? We have a lot of existing grantees that want to take advantage of the new funding that's available. So this is a very nice chart that we put together to handle that. I won't go over everything specifically, but again, how you want to start is on the left side. If you have an existing grant, you're going to go down, find what you have. You have a multi-purpose, and then you can go across, and that'll tell you what you can apply for in FY24. So for example, multi-purpose grant, you can apply for another multi-purpose grant if you have a 75% drawdown on that existing grant by October 1st, I believe it is. You can apply for a community-wide grant without any issues there. And then, for example, you can't be a non-lead member of an assessment coalition. So again, there's a lot of different mix and match examples. You can see here, green is good. Yellow, you usually have to have a 70% drawdown. So it's doable, but if you don't have that 70%, even if you're at 69, that's one of the things in the threshold that'll immediately disqualify you right there. So the rest of your application is a moot point if you don't have that 70%. So we can go to the next slide, and this will talk. Some people want to apply for multiple grants in general. So if you're just coming in, you've never had a grant, for example, you can apply for I guess you can apply for 2 grants. So yeah, anyway, again, this is just a chart. You can follow it because, again, we want to spread out the love. We essentially don't want to, if someone's a rock star writing proposals, we don't want to, give them all the money. We kind of want to spread it out. So we kind of limit you on what you can apply for. So just take a look at it. Again, follow it down on the left side, go across, and that'll tell you if you're eligible or not. And then you can just prioritize from there, whether cleanup grant's more important to you, maybe an assessment grant, you want to, build your inventory. So you can just go from there. Next slide, please. So next, we'll talk about some of the eligible activities that you can do under your grants. And again, the revolving loan fund's not offered this year. The multi-purpose grants is one of the bigger ones that we're highlighting this year, I believe. We haven't traditionally had too many of these. So I believe that's why they're making a push for it this year. So the big thing with these is you can do both assessment and cleanups. Under the assessment and cleanup grants, you can only do one or the other. Usually assessment, you can do all the work up to the cleanup, but you can't actually do the cleanup work. And then kind of vice versa, cleanups is not necessarily for assessment, it's more so for that cleanup and remediation. So the multi-purpose combines the two of them. It's the best of both worlds. But we do have a little extra requirements on that because, we don't want someone applying and just doing assessment work because, we ran out of assessment grants to give. We really want to make sure we highlight both aspects of this grant. So you're going to have to conduct at least a phase 2, and you're going to have to remediate at least one site. And you're also going to have a revitalization plan for your target area if this doesn't already exist. And this must include a feasible reuse strategy for at least one priority site. And again, since this does involve the cleanup aspect of it, similar to the cleanup grant, you must be the sole owner of the site by the date of the application. So by November 13th, you must be the owner of this site. We do allow for some extenuating circumstances if this is communicated to us, like for example, the sale's pending and it closes on November 14th, but make sure you're in contact beforehand. These are very special circumstances, and usually this November 13th is a hard deadline otherwise. So next slide, please. So some more activities that you can do in your multi-purpose grant, developing inventories for brownfield sites, prioritizing your sites, community engagement, your environmental assessments, developing cleanup plans, reuse plans. You can carry out cleanup activities on brownfield sites, so you can actually follow through. This is nice. Typically, we'll see people get an assessment grant. They'll have one or two particular sites that are more complicated and actually need to be remediated and cleaned up, and then they have to wait and apply for a cleanup grant. So if you apply and are selected for a multi-purpose plant, there's no lag in between. You can immediately go from that phase 2 to the reuse planning or remediation planning, and then the actual cleanup. And then again, you can develop your overall revitalization plans for the site. So some of the new changes to the multipurpose this year is the increased amount of funding. It used to be you can only apply for up to 800K or 800,000. It's now 1 million. Regarding the prior ongoing community involvement, you got to discuss your underserved populations in the target area. That's very important. You will lose points on your review if you don't talk about the underserved population in your community. There are participant support costs that are now available, and these include stipends for community members to attend meetings, for travel to meetings, for childcare expenses. Again, we really want applicants to provide specific examples of how the proposed assessment will, or the project will address EJ issues, and responses will be evaluated against criteria in section 5A. And then climate vulnerabilities. Climate adaptation is a new push that the agency is making. So this is gonna, if you can include any climate vulnerabilities, climate adaptations in your proposal, this will definitely help your chances. And then describe your efforts to promote strong labor practices, local hiring, or links to members in the community. We really want to see you revitalize your community, hire from within, not necessarily outside. So we really want to see, help your community in the best way possible. Maybe you have a ton of jobs and you're looking for something else, you need tourism or something like that. It just make it relatable to your communities and, fit your specific needs. And next is the assessment grants. So again, this is the 3 different streams we have. You can be in a coalition with a couple different members. You could apply for your own community and have a community-wide assessment, or there is a state and tribal assessment grants available. These are your maximum fundings for each. You don't have to apply for the maximum if you don't want to. We see some smaller organizations, they feel like maybe that's overwhelming. They only have a couple sites. They don't think they could, manage this amount of funding. You can apply for smaller amounts if you'd like. Again, I've seen very specific amounts. I've seen 300,000, 200,000. It's up to you based upon your needs again. So just see the assessment grant activities. I was just gonna say the project years here again have changed. It used to be 3 years and it was 4 years. So.
Christian, we got another question. Christopher asked, can awards be retroactive?
Awards be retroactive? I don't know I fully understand it, but I want to say no. All our awards are typically made on October 1st. There is a period after the selection so I think we're going to talk about this a little later, the debrief. After the selection process, you are able to ask for a debrief in which you can hear where you lost points, where you can make up points for the following year. And let's say maybe you find a discrepancy, you could fight that and then maybe get higher on the list and then get awarded, but they're never going to necessarily go back and retroactively award a grant. That answers your question.
Um, uh, if we've started the study, can we use grant funding for work performed prior to the award?
Oh, okay. So I would say you could fund a continuation of that, but we can't pay for any work that is completed before the award. There is one caveat. There is pre-award that is available for these grants. It's very easy. You just have to put a little blurb in your, not necessarily your application, but once you're selected, we work on the application documents with you, a second round of application documents, let's say. And in that second round, we just put a little blurb in there that says you want pre-award cost, and then you can start incurring costs beginning on July 1st. You can't have anything prior to that. So if you submit an invoice for work completed in June 29th, that'll get disapproved. But if you request this, then you can start incurring costs on July 1st. You might be able to do a continuation of the study if there was like a hard stop or something, and you wanted to pick that up again. Now that you got the grant funds, you could do that. But again, you have to request the pre-award, and it's only the 90 days going back to July 1st that you can be eligible for funding. So your assessment grant activities are your inventory. You can, a lot of communities are not very familiar with brownfield, so education is sometimes the first step. And then after that, you build your inventory, get a collection of the different brownfield sites, see where you want to invest your money, what, jives with your master plan, what makes the most sense for you. You can do redevelopment planning to see, does this building actually make sense for the, the purpose that we want, the ecotourism that we're wanting, or does it make sense to put it somewhere else? Things like that. You can, use the funding to get the community involved, hold meetings, really see what the community wants to have there, what's going to make the most sense for them, what's going to be productive. Can advance local cleanups and redevelopment planning, centered around brownfields impacted areas. There's site-specific cleanup plans, reuse. You can do travel and training, and again, basically the assessment grants do everything up to the cleanup. You can do cleanup planning, but you can't do the actual remediation work. So again, some changes to the assessment grants, specifically the assessment coalition. The increased funding from 500,000 to 1.5 million. That's 3 times as much. At least 2 sites must be addressed in each member's boundary. So if you have 2 members, 3 members, you're going to have 4 or 6 sites. So just make sure you include that, because if you have 2 sites from 2 of the 3 members, you're definitely going to lose points for that. Participant support costs now available. Again, this is for stipends for community members to attend meetings. If they need stipends for travel, things, bus fares, things like that. If they need childcare expenses, they need someone to watch the kids while they go to this meeting, things like that. That's now available. Again, there's a special emphasis on EJ challenges and climate vulnerabilities. So I really urge you to take a look at those, and if you can work those into your application, that'll definitely help again. And again, we're really trying to bring it all back into the community. We're really trying to revitalize the community in your neighborhood. So anything you can help, hire from within, procure local contractors, bring the community members, things like that. I also will put a plug in real quick for the job training. I love that. We see a lot of these assessment cleanup grants come in, and then they'll get a job training grant, which will help them build up their local workforce. So they don't necessarily have to hire other people outside the community to come work on the brownfield sites. So we can go to the next slide. So again, another assessment grant avenue that's available is your community-wide. If you just want to apply for your local community, the township, you're able to do that. Or if you're a state agency or travel agency, you can do that. Again, special emphasis on EJ and climate vulnerabilities. These are, again, the agency's goals for this year. So anything that you can include regarding those 2 subjects will definitely help you. And again, really trying to help bolster your community. We don't really want to bring in outside, well, I don't want to say we don't want to bring in outside help, but we really want to help the people in your community, build themselves back up. So anything you can help to strengthen your community would definitely help. That brings us to our cleanup grants. We can go to the next slide. So for cleanup grants, these are your actual remediation efforts. These are going to be for a single or multiple sites. It just depends. I don't know if there's a limit on how many sites. I typically see a maximum of like 2 maybe. But again, these are where you're going to get real specific. You're going to have a real defined cost and scope of what you're planning to do here. So you're going to have your program reporting, your cleanup oversight, environmental monitoring. If you got to do any sampling to verify the cleanup has been completed to the standard. So your redevelopment planning is going to be centered around brownfield impacts areas. This is going to be your reuse plan. And again, you're going to have to get QA involved if you're going to do any sampling activities to verify that cleanup's been completed. So you may have to deal with your field sampling plans, things like that, which are another cost that are eligible under your grant. So one of the big things, again, is for a cleanup grant, you must be the sole owner of the site, or again, if there's an impending sale or something like that, special circumstances, reach out as early as possible to communicate that to us. It's not always a guarantee. We will try and work with you though, but usually you must be the sole owner of the site by the application deadline. You also must have conducted your AAI prior to acquiring the property. This is typically 180 days before the sale of the property. And this is just your liability protection. Again, we're not paying for potentially responsible parties. So just highly recommend you do the AAI, which is typically included in your phase 1 environmental assessment. So some new changes, again, with the infrastructure funding, all the grants have seen an increase of funding available. So the maximum amount has been increased from 2 million to 5 million. The state determination letter must clearly indicate the information is for this year's cleanup for the FY24. So I believe the last year we saw a lot of people try and recycle letters, which we understand it saves you work, saves you time, hassle, all of that. But we really want to get, the most current information. We want to make sure that nothing has, necessarily changed at the site for whatever reason. So we really want to see you get an updated letter from your state agency. Make sure everything jives with your application, your addresses, everything matches up, names, all that things, because again, the lawyers get involved in the threshold process. They can be very, stricklers. So make sure everything matches up across all of these documents. Again, provide specific examples of how the proposed assessment project will address EJ issues and challenges, climate vulnerabilities. I think this is supposed to say cleanup project since this is the cleanup section, but anyway, it's kind of the same across the board, as I'm sure you guys can see. A lot of the same goals we're trying to push for all of these, but also again, describe efforts, how you're gonna, help bolster your community. Regarding the guidance on classifying construction and contractual costs, this has been a big thing this past go around. But for cleanup grants, we're really asking you to delineate the distinction between the two. We realize that it's very hard to do up front. Things are subject to change. It does take about a year to get your app, or from the time you apply to when you get the actual grant. So costs can change, fluctuate. We understand that. So when we want you to give it your best estimate up front to distinguish between your construction costs and your contractual line items. So I think it says EPA recommends applicants apply the principal purpose of the contrast test instead of characterizing discrete tasks that the same contractor will perform. So if a principal purpose of the contract is for construction services, then the cost for contract should be considered construction budget line. Otherwise, it should be contractual. There's a lot more information available on our website about this. This was a big point of contention the last go around. But again, feel free to reach out to the EPA out here in Region 3. We can provide you more information on the distinctions between the two. But again, this is meant to be an estimate. Later on, towards the end of your cleanup grant, we'll probably have to do an amendment to actually characterize the cost so that they're representative of what you actually spent it on. And that's just so that we can put it out to the public to say, hey, this is, you know, where your tax dollars are going. So we really just, that's why we're doing this. So next slide. So your community notification, this is another big point. You must have a local ad in the newspaper or equivalent means. And I believe this must be no later than 2 weeks before the application is submitted. You must include proof of this in your applications. Typically, we'll see people include a clip of the news article, but again, it must have a date prior to 2 weeks. If it says, you know, November 12th on there, you just did it, you know, the night before the deadline, that's immediately going to fail you through threshold. And again, the rest of your application is a moot point. We won't even look at it. So again, let's see, you must clearly state that you also have to have your APCA. This is required beforehand. You can always update it, but we want to see that you have something going into this. You've thought about it. You must have a comment period for the public. And yeah, just if there's any comments, if there's no comments, just say that. But we really want to see the, you know, you put it out to the public for them to have an opinion on. Again, the public meeting, we really want to make sure that this is what the community wants. You know, we don't want to make sure you're just getting this ready for, you know, a new train rail to go in the backyard that the city's solely going to benefit from the tax revenue, but all the residents are going to hate. So that's why we really harp on the public meetings, get them involved, you know, really solicit their opinions and then incorporate that into your application. And so I guess that leads us to questions. Does anyone have any questions? You're that good, huh?
We do have a question in the chat.
Is there a funding match required?
Yes.
Not this year. So with the infrastructure funding, ever since that came around, we have not seen the cost match. Typically with our regular annual appropriations, we do require a cost match on certain grants. For example, like the cleanup revolving loan funds, they usually typically have a 20% match. So maybe in the future, we might see that again if the infrastructure funding goes away, but at this current time, there's no cost match on any of the grants. Brownfield grants.
All right, we'll certainly have the opportunity for additional questions. And next up is talking about the grant package. Karen?
You can go to the next slide. Yep, there we go. So as we just talked, we've already got a line straight through on this slide that just where we were just about to answer that question for you. So you guys are on it. The cost share is not a part of the 2024 application process. You know, there's some basics required as part of your narrative. That highlight of limited to 3 pages, all of those things hold true throughout the grant. If there's, you know, page limits, stay within that. They will review within that limit only. So if you carry over to 4th page, my understanding is it won't be reviewed. So work diligently to fit it into the page requirements without it being 8-point font, as Christian noted, with no borders. Legible, but concise. Of course, we need to know who you are, your funding request type, how much you're asking for, what the location of the project is, who your contacts are, information about your population, your target areas, typical stuff. And those letters from DEQ for all grants. So we'll have your support letter. For the cleanup grants, that's the letter that talks about eligibility under the voluntary remediation program, and your level of site characterization that's been completed or that will be completed by June 15th, 2024. I'm sorry, I forgot to reference that. It's on an earlier slide. There's a note there about releasing copies of applications. And part of that is there's a notation in the guidance that does say that these applications may become available to the public. Please don't put confidential information. Please don't put personal contact information. If there is any confidential information that really needs to be part of it, there's a request to identify that information. But ideally, if you can avoid any of that, anything that shouldn't be released to the public, just exclude it, work around it, right to your best abilities. But it's an important reminder that these can be made public. Next slide, please.
Karen,
Yes.
and this might actually be a question for Christian, but Anna in the chat asked if it's important to show potential to leverage funds as needed for the grants. Like, is that necessary? Like,
Can you go back a slide? Christian, I think we're probably going to say the same thing. This narrative is your introduction in terms of your project description and the value of the work. I think your ability to leverage other funds adds to that discussion. Christian, you were about to say something.
It definitely helps you. I don't believe it's required right now, but basically what we're looking for is, let's say this assessment grant, cleanup, whatever, it's not enough to cover it. We want to make sure that there's like kind of like the gap. You have something to fill in the gap. So that's usually where we're looking to see leverage funds. Or if just say, we clean up this site and it, helps for redevelopment, $15 million investment. It's helpful. You definitely want to be careful, because if you say in your application, we secured this funding, like a $20,000 grant that we're going to use for this, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, we have the grant, we're just going to put it somewhere else, not necessarily towards Brownfield. That's where you might get in trouble, because it's in your application. We might hold you to it. So, if you're speculating, you might say we anticipate pairing with this or receiving this grant. That might be helpful, but just be careful. If you say it's secured, we're going to apply it to this grant, then that's when you could be held accountable for that. So if you say we're going to donate or put up a $20,000 of our own money, that's when they might hold you accountable for that. So just be careful. But it is important. It does help. We do like to see it.
right. Thank you both.
Back on that cost sharing and exactly what Christian just said. When I read through the guidance, the cost sharing is not required. And actually they indicate don't offer voluntary cost sharing, please. It was very politely worded. There's no need to voluntarily offer cost sharing. It's not required. But that's a little bit different than identifying the value of your project towards leveraging other funds. So, okay, next slide. Forms, lots of details here. I think the goal, understand the content of each form, complete each one to the best of your ability. If there's a section that is not applicable, don't leave it blank, put NA or not applicable. You do want to complete all sections of the documentation. And if you have questions about the specifics or the details, that's where the tab folks are going to come in and be available to you. And if you have questions that DEQ needs to answer, we are also going to be available to help kind of talk through those things. I would encourage you not to just make assumptions, but to ask those questions if time allows. And again, make sure this is part of that complete document. If you're up against an A+ grant application and yours is only an A, and it's only an A because it's missing a piece, that A+ grant is going to be awarded and yours may not. Next slide. For the cleanup grants, this is part of the conversation with DEQ, and this is what leads to that letter of eligibility on the VRP, our discussion of site characterization level. How far have you gotten? If you need assistance kind of defining this or making statements about this, or where are we in the process, Sometimes we can look at our VRP process and say, well, here are the steps that would lead through our program that would be similar steps you would take under an EPA grant guided, grant funded program. And that may be valuable in helping you to identify your issues, your standards, your state, what your comparative values may be, what alternatives you have, and help you kind of define that presentation in your cleanup grant. Next slide. So the grant package does include community support letters that are provided by DEQ. I put my name there as a contact. You can send your requests to me. Again, we do have a team. If you send it to me at Anderson, because that's who you sent it to before, it's going to get to the right person. If you send it to Lucas Hamelman, because that's who you sent it to before, it's going to get to the right, it's going to get to us. We do have a plan in place to get these accomplished. We are requesting that a 1 week turnaround, give us a little bit of time in case somebody's out or we're out doing site visits, because it takes us a little bit of time. We do want to take into consideration details that you're providing to us. We'd like to know, if you're doing a community assessment grant, a little bit of detail about what neighborhoods or what communities or what streetscapes you plan to address. That gives us a little bit of understanding. It also helps us communicate down the road, especially if you're coming later and we're talking about leveraging other funds or using our state Brownfields grant. If we're familiar, it's a little bit helpful for us to provide that support letter, and gives it a little more personalized response for your EPA grant. If you are planning to send us a request, we'd like to have them by November 3rd. We feel like that gives us enough time to respond and for you time to then put it into your package and get that submitted. If you call us on November 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th and say, last minute decision, can you get us this letter? Yes, we have multiple people that are working on these. We will do our best to get you that letter and turn it around quickly.
So I have one thing on that too.
Sure.
We realize that's kind of out of your control. It's more on the state agency, and they do have a lot on their plate usually. So we are a little lenient with this. If you don't have the letter, but you submit it for that, you can include that initial letter that you sent to DEQ, requesting that eligibility. If you include that in your application and just say, hey, we're waiting for this, we'll supply it when it comes, we are lenient with that. We'll allow that. We'll accept that at a later point, as long as it's in there. If you just completely leave it out and don't include that original letter that you sent to them, then that will fail you through the, the threshold eligibility. So.
Okay. But we'll do our best. We don't want that situation. That's just something someone has to remember after the fact. Next slide. So the narrative criteria, and this is where you get into the meat of your application. And everyone may not agree with my analogy, but this is kind of my perspective on these grant applications. It's not unlike putting together a piece of IKEA furniture. You can try to put it together without reading the instructions and following the instructions, but chances are you'll end up with a random piece that you don't know where it goes, and you have to decide whether you want to sit in that chair or not. So you don't want to miss any pieces, and you want to put the pieces together in the right order, and you want to secure them snugly. So not too loose, not too tight, something that's just right. And I think, and be successful. You could put that chair together and might be successful, but the chances are higher, without the instructions, that it won't be quite right. And you'll always be tightening a piece, or you'll always be fixing it, or you'll always be a little unsure, or you'll be on the floor in a pile of debris. We don't want that. We want you to read the instructions. That's why they're there. They will tell you exactly what you need to include in exactly which sections. And then, use your best writing skills to try to snugly fit that information into those sections. And I'll go
Here,
back. Go
I have
ahead.
to say that Christian and Becca and I are really loving this analogy.
So, I mean, it's pretty exciting when you put together IKEA chair without instructions, but you always wonder. And in that instance, you know, it's very clear. It might be pictures and there may be text. Here you're going to be reading a bunch of text as your instructions, but that's okay. Just read the instructions, stay within the limits, complete every section. You know, beyond that, it's the detail of your site, and you know. So those are opportunities, you know, to answer these questions and these components. Hopefully, when you're starting to write these things, you've already identified your target areas and brownfields. You've kind of mapped this out, and now you're putting it into the application. If you are having trouble with your description and your narrative, or you're unsure, you know, give us a call. We'll try to help. Tab will be there to help. But I think by the time you're writing these applications, you've already thought through these target areas. You're able to describe your priority sites. You have identified target areas, and you have a strategy. This is where your leveraging resources comes into play, the discussion from earlier. Are there other factors that play into your ability to assess this site and redevelop this site? Are there utilities that are already in place that will be valuable? Are there other hindrances that you need to overcome? This is a great place to kind of identify, you know, those aspects that you've really thought it through. Go ahead to the next slide. So we did talk about identifying your you know, your community partners, you're also identifying, you know, populations, sensitive populations, threats to populations. This goes back to your EJ evaluations and things like that. What are the needs? What is the value of this effort? And it doesn't do any good if you have just looked at what you plan to do, but you don't really know how it'll impact. You want to talk about that impact, the value of this investment, the value of this effort. If you want to do some work on a site with the intent of doing nothing, there's not a lot of value in that. If you can define, we want to do this effort, and then that will be a catalyst for other growth, other economic development, other community enhancements, that outcome piece, this is where you're really going to highlight that. And people that are able to do that are winning the grants. You know, we've seen it in narratives where, you know, the presentation of what is the benefit, what is the value, how is this going to impact? And if you can put, you know, real numbers in that presentation, it's a lot easier to see and a lot easier for your reviewer. So that would be my wisdoms on that. You do also, this is an opportunity to highlight your partners on this project. It doesn't have to be, you know, it could be a neighborhood groups, it could be community groups, it could be others who play a role in your decision making, maybe sit down as part of a stakeholder table, and identify those groups, because if it's a collaborative effort, that can be a good thing. Kristen, do you want to add anything? I threw you on I threw you on the spot. I'm sorry. We're just in the sense of those sensitive populations that you touched on earlier. That's where I was thinking.
I don't know if I necessarily have anything to add, but you know, again, just don't admit sections. You know, again, it's a balance of the page limit, but you know, if you can, you know, include your sensitive areas, you know, as much information as possible. It doesn't have to be, you know, super long drawn out, but just, you know, get your point across, I guess I would say.
Okay.
I would like to add that when you actually look at the grant application, it includes links to like the EJ Screen tool. So take a look at that. If you have a level of comfort in navigating that site, that is what you need to help identify the threats to your population. And that is what gives you the numbers that Karen is referring to. And if you don't have a level of comfort or you would like a little bit of assistance, that's something that we here at TAB can help with. Seth in particular really enjoys a good data and policy search. So if that's something that we can provide assistance with, I can tell he's enthusiastically waiting for his chance to dig into some data. So hopefully that helps a bit, Karen.
Thanks. Okay. And next slide, I'm done.
Okay. All right, well, that's me. Okay, so part 3 of the narrative talks about task descriptions, cost estimates, and measuring progress. This part is, to me, a little bit more dry, although it's a very hard act to follow, to Karen's IKEA furniture analogy. But this is where you're going to talk about the actual implementation of your project, your anticipated schedule, who's going to be your activity lead, your expected outputs, and cost estimates. And so we highlight here a few things to remember. This is where we want you to identify your participant support costs and the processes. So you have the opportunity to talk about who is going to be doing which particular phase within your application. Determine how you will identify additional sites. One of the beautiful things about an assessment grant application is that you identify sites within your target area that you want to include within your application. But as we well know, as a previous assessment grant holder, that can change. Your vision for the properties that you had in mind can change for various reasons. Maybe the property owner doesn't want to be included in it, or you see more that you would actually like to include or prioritize. You have the opportunity to add those to your list. So that is a great thing. Your target area needs to stay the same, but you have some flexibility with the actual sites there. So you want to be clear on how your cost estimates were calculated and estimated. As Christian said, you are submitting this at, this particular date and time, but a year from now, you want to think about how the costs could change. Certainly, it would have been a tough to imagine the cost jump that we've had in some things, right? But do your best to make sure you factor in that contingency cost for extra costs that could and inflation that could be incurred. And so you want to base that on some logic when you're providing that budget sample. And the next slide shows a screen grab of that. Like I say, there needs to be some logic behind that. And when it comes to your assessment grant, projects that allocate at least 40% of the funds to the tasks that are associated with the specific work site will be evaluated more favorably. Christian, you don't have to comment unless there's been any change in that. Christian's like, please stop putting me on the spot. Again, just more that goes along with part 3 of the narrative. These are just some examples, some screenshots of the actual budget example. So you can see just generally how it's laid out here for some examples of the site assessment, but also cleanup and redevelopment planning. So you can see you get pretty detailed here, but you could certainly get more into the weeds. And so that's not what you need to do, but this gives enough of a logic to give the reviewers a sense of where you're coming up with these numbers. Also with part 3, when you think about the outputs for your cleanup grant, you want to make sure you are addressing the cleanup plans, your community involvement plan. We've already touched on how important that is, especially when you start to think about the underserved communities, focusing on environmental justice, but also where are areas of climate vulnerability, talking about your final ABCA or the analysis of your brownfield cleanup alternative document. So that is prepared as a draft, but that's going to be finalized throughout this process. Your administrative records, and keeping the process and keeping on your progress, your grant progress throughout the duration of it. And also then you have your cleanup completion report for your letter. And so continue to work with your state environmental agencies. They are your friends. So definitely keep them on speed dial because they're going to be incredibly instrumental throughout the process. When it comes to the assessment grant, your outputs are going to include the site inventories, phase 1 and 2 environmental site assessments, your site cleanup plans, planning activity deliverables, and also community meetings. So these are things that can be covered under your assessment grant. Again, another beautiful thing about the assessment grant is all the great planning tools that you can do. I don't have that site readily available. I should have, but if you look on the EPA Brownfield grant site, you can find eligible planning activities, and those can be included in your assessment grant. If that's something that you hadn't thought about or you'd like to learn more, we're absolutely happy to help you do that, because you still have to maintain site assessments as the base, the bulk of your assessment grant application, but you're eligible to do so many great planning activities that would be covered under the grant as well. When it comes to measuring your environmental results, so those outputs that you are anticipating, you need to come up with a way to track, measure, and evaluate the progress. And so some ways that you could do this to track it include software products, progress reporting, scheduled team progress meetings, and contractor support. So for us, when we had an assessment grant, we have a free shared project management software that we use. It allows us to have access, and we share it with our consultant who does the environmental site work. So we update the tasks and the work that happens, and we share that with them so that we can both update the information in real time, and then that translates to the reporting that we need to put into acres for our quarterly reporting. We have regular team meetings so that we can check in on how the status of projects are going, whether that's actually preparing the property approval questionnaires. So starting with that process to the physical assessment work. So we're just checking on that. And if there's been any interest in the additional sites, that we are looking to initiate, and just, again, the support that they provide us, we're just checking in on that. So when it comes to tracking your big picture, that's where you want to be mindful of leveraging for your other critical funding. So again, just kind of keep that in mind and what you need to do to work toward that, and then accomplishing your redevelopment vision plan, right? So that's ultimately what it's all about. So when you have your assessment grant and you're talking about your targeted area, how are these sites that you are taking on trying to help you accomplish that overall goal? And so this is good to, this is why we really haven't touched on this now, but having a project champion, or honestly multiple project champions is a great thing to have, so that they can be your cheerleader along the way. Sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming, and you're kind of saying to yourself, how is it only Tuesday in this week, for example, but if you have those cheerleaders and, they give you energy and keep you focused and remind you of why this is what you're doing. So I personally think that is helpful, again, in helping you to keep moving forward and maintain that momentum. When it comes to the cleanup grants, this is where for your proposed cleanup plan, you need to outline the cleanup plan for the site. So this is what you should have been working on again, just with the budget, as with when you prepared the budget, you put some sound logic into that. You will do the same for the proposal to clean up the site. So you're going to outline that. You're going to describe the contaminated material on the site. So that's what your phase 1 and 2 environmental site assessments have done. So now that you have a better sense of that, you have a sense of what needs to be done to prepare that. And that information you can pull from your ABCA. We're highlighting here to point out that reviewers are not going to see the ABCA, but you do have to have that draft prepared. And so the information that feeds into that ABCA is what you can use in this proposed cleanup plan. Christian, I feel like that was a lot. Is there anything, or Karen, that maybe I should have touched on? Next up is part 4.
I'm good.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think you did a pretty good job.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so part 4, the final part of the narrative, includes your programmatic capability and your past performance. So with this, you're going to identify your organizational structure. So this is where you're going to identify your team and identify their skills and what they bring to the table and what they are going to be contributing to the project. You're going to identify the key staff. And so you're going to state how they will work together to make the whole project work seamlessly for the duration of the grant. And then also, you're going to talk about additional resources. So, we've touched on this earlier in this webinar. So you want to be able to talk about how you may need to pull on additional expertise or financial resources. So one thing to think about is if there's someone on your team whom you suspect may be approaching retirement and that's on your radar, you want to be able to address that. Or it happens all the time, someone on your team takes a new job. How are you going to address that so that the EPA knows you have a plan in place to address these staffing changes that can happen along the way? So identify this as well.
Yeah, one other thing for that.
Great.
We'd also like to see if you can include like the community organizations, how they're going to be included in a meaningful way. And specifically, I remember there was one prompt this past go around, and it said, describe how community members are going to be involved in a meaningful way in regards to assessment, site selection, and like cleanup planning. And it had that end in there, right? So some of the reviewers would take off points if you didn't have a community partner for assessment, another one for cleanup, and another one for assessment. So I'd specifically make sure you pay special close attention to that. I think it was even underlined in the prompt, like the end. So specifically call out like, hey, these people are going to do, help with assessment. These people are going to help out with site selection, and just kind of show how they're going to be involved in a meaningful way. We don't want you to just name people like, oh, we have these cool organizations in our community. Say like they're going to come to our meetings, they're going to help with outreach. We're going to solicit input from them and incorporate it into our, community plan or master plan or whatever. So that's my little tidbit.
Excellent point. Thank you. All right, final piece for part 4. And I know that this is an important piece. I know I've heard this one stressed a lot is when you talk about the past performance, there are 3 options. So you can identify yourself as an applicant who currently has or has previously received an EPA Brownfield grant. So you want to speak to that, address that, state which type of grant you had, when it was, identify how you've done on that, identify applicants who've not yet received an EPA Brownfield grant, but if you do have other federal or non-federal assistance agreements, in other words, grants. So, obviously the best answer here is when you have number 1 that you can provide to demonstrate that experience that you have. That's okay if you don't have that. Answer number 2, and you want to be clear about how you were able to manage that grant process. Really beef that up, talk about that, because you really don't want to have to answer number 3 for an applicant who has never received federal or a federal or non-federal grant. That is where I believe you don't get any points. Correct, Christian? I think so.
You don't get any points. It's not necessarily held against you, I don't think. And sometimes, because again, we do, like I said, love to spread the love out. So occasionally they try and, push for new applicants or new grantees. So I think when it does come to the selection, you might have like 1 point, like the cutoff for new grantees might be 1 point lower. The existing one might be 1 point higher. So it's not necessarily held against you. It's kind of neutral. But yeah, any of them will be fine. It's just we're looking for a comparison, or again, if you're a new grantee or a new applicant, we do like to see that. We don't want to just keep giving to the big organizations over and over again.
Good point. Thanks, Christian. All right, getting into SAM.gov, I'm just going to touch on this briefly. We really want to make sure that you already have your SAM.gov account set up. You yourself may not have one, but someone within your organization who does have a federal grant should already have this account. Just find out who that person is, because again, if you've got a federal grant, you're already set up. So you want to confirm your registration. So you want to update, if you need to update your registration, do that, check the status of it. This does need to be done once a year, so you want to make sure it has not lapsed. And so you have the ability to search by your entity. And so you can do that within the software. But again, once you receive a grant, you need to make sure that you're updating this every year. And it can take 2 weeks or more to complete. So definitely don't wait on this. I know we've had to navigate with some applicants, some processes with SAM.gov, and it's surprising, unfortunately, how sometimes just the minutia of that can hold things up. So if you have any questions with this, let us know. Basically talked about all this already, but we've just got a screenshot to give you an example of what the site looks like. In order to register and renew your account, you do need your unique entity ID, your tax ID number, your bank routing number, and then all non-federal entities must mail an original, signed, and notarized letter to the Federal Service Desk within 30 days of your activation. I think I've covered everything there. Carrie would definitely want me to point out to watch out for scams. There are some sites out there who will say, hey, for this low price, we can help you with your SAM.gov account. Don't fall for that. We will help you for free. Might drive us all crazy in the process, but we're here to help, and please let us help you. Again, that's what we're here for. Christian, value of the debrief process.
Yeah. So every year, if you're not selected for funding, if you submitted an application, we encourage you to ask for the debrief. We make the list public of who was selected. We also send out letters letting you know that you weren't selected. And at this point, we do again let you know in this letter that you can request a debrief. We're not just going to give it. You simply just have to reach out to us saying like, hey, we just want to talk about this, and we'll set up a meeting with you. There are some, rules about what we can and can't say. They really want us to kind of go over where you lost points, where you can make up points for the following year. We can't always get into super specifics on it, but we can at least go over where you lost points. This does give you a chance to dispute things. Maybe something was overlooked or just misunderstood, and with some clarification, maybe that could possibly increase your score. You can dispute it. So yeah, there's a lot of, you can ask questions here. Usually we like to keep this between the applicant and the EPA. We usually don't like to have consultants or anyone join in, because that could potentially give them an unfair advantage. They work on multiple different grants, so that would give them an unfair advantage over the other environmental professionals that are also helping to write these grants. So that's why we usually just like to keep it one-on-one. You can, under special circumstances, request to include others outside your organization, but we typically have to run this up through our headquarters and see what their response is. So yeah, but it's very valuable. I really encourage you to reach out. You'll get your reviewer, the home region reviewer will provide you with a debrief, and they can go over comments that are provided from their own review, and then the other two reviewers that are on the panel. So you usually do get a kind of wide range of comments. And then yeah, ultimately we're here to try and help you strengthen your application. We want to see you do better. We don't want to see you become discouraged and not apply again, because we do have the funding. Every year it seems to get tighter and tighter, the competition. For example, this last year, it was down to like 1 point, but like make or break your application, because that's just where the cutoff line fell. And again, depending upon what everyone requests for and how many applications you receive, it just, that line where that cutoff is can fluctuate. So yeah, there's a lot of good information in the debrief, highly suggest it. Yeah, I think we can go to the next slide. Is there any questions?
If you don't have any questions now and you think of some after the webinar, feel free to contact us. That's why we're here. Becca will be following up this presentation with a copy of the slide deck and the recorded webinar, so that if you found the slide deck helpful, and we hope you did, you can refer to that as well.
Well, I would say my closing thoughts are then do your homework and try and project confidence. So if you're writing this application and you simply say, hey, we think we have 100 brownfields, we're going to do 16 phase ones, 5 phase twos. This sounds good. But if you come in and it's like, hey, I don't know how many brownfields we have in our community, but I can name at least 10. That's why I want to get this assessment grant to do an inventory. I think the first year is going to be all outreach. I'm the only one that knows brownfields right now, so I think I have to educate the public before I can solicit meaningful impact. And then, we'll prioritize the sites, things like that. Or if you come in and say like, hey, we've got 2 big sites that we know are going to be a problem. They're probably going to need cleanup remediation. We're going to focus our efforts here, get them ready for the cleanup grant. This just kind of gives the reviewer like a confidence that like, you did your homework, you know what you have, you're ready to hit the ground running almost, as opposed to someone that just is like, if I get the money, I'll figure it out along the way. So that just really helps the reviewer. It just shows that you have a plan, you did your homework, you know what brownfields are, you're devoted to this. So I think that really helps, reviewers when they're reading this, as opposed to those that, don't really know what they're doing and they're just going to figure it out along the way. We realize things change, these are estimates, your projections, for whatever reason they can change, deviate, that's fine. But as long as you show us that you're thinking about this, you have some idea of what you're talking about, you're invested, like that really goes a long way for us.
Awesome, thank you. Before people head out, we do have a couple of resources that we want to share with you. We also have a poll that should pop up if you've got the latest version of Zoom, and it's just please rate your current understanding of EPA Brownfields grants. If you could take that poll for us, that helps us with our grant requirements just to kind of measure learning and growth. And while people are answering that poll, I think it's Seth now. Is that right, Katie?
Yes.
Yes, it is. I had got to move the poll out of the middle of the screen. So some final housekeeping things. WVU Tab can help as the tab provider to EPA Region 3. All of the resources that we provide are free. Those include brownfield education, trainings, webinars, and events, including events like today's webinar, resource identification, grant writing assistance, grant review. Oops, poll popped right back up in my screen. Grant writing assistance, grant review, and resource roadmaps. We can also help with local brownfield program support through inventory development, questions on potential brownfield sites, and technical support, as well as project development and design assistance. That's site-specific, and design support comes from the WVU Davis College. Next slide. And some important deadlines to remember. The deadline to submit a draft application for review to our office is November 3rd. The deadline to submit a request for a letter to the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality is also November 3rd. And then the EPA grant submittal deadline is November 13th at midnight, but we always encourage you to submit early if you can. And for resources and references, these links are hyperlinks. So when you get the slides, you'll be able to click on these and go directly to the website. You can find grant writing resources, state-specific resources, upcoming events and webinars that you can register for to get some more insight, and funding opportunities as well. And these are the contact information for our lovely partners at the DEQ and the EPA. And then we encourage you to stay connected. Follow us on X or Facebook at WVU Tab. Our website's also linked there. We really encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. And if you have any questions or need any help, we also really encourage you to schedule a one-on-one consultation. I'm not sure if those are hyperlinks or not. It doesn't look like they are, but we'll make sure that those links are included before we send the slide deck out in the PDF version. Our WVU Tab office email is over here at the bottom, as well as the contact information for relevant persons in our office. So if you have any questions or need any help, schedule a one-on-one consultation, reach out to one of us. We're willing to help you in any way that we can.
Thanks, Seth.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. And if you